I stood in the corner of my son's dining room, holding a glass of champagne I hadn't touched, watching Ethan work the crowd like he was running for mayor. 20 years I'd scraped and saved to put him through business school. 20 years of double shifts at the textile factory, then evening classes to become a teacher, then more years bent over a sewing machine when teaching didn't pay enough. My hands were gnarled now, arthritic, but they'd built the foundation for everything he had. The house around me screamed money, not the kind of money I'd ever known, scraping together rent payments and buying day-old bread. This was new money, the kind that came from leveraged buyouts and hostile takeovers, and all those terms Ethan threw around like they meant something noble. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings that probably cost more to paint than I'd made in a year of teaching. The marble floors were so polished I could see my reflection, an old woman in a department store dress that I'd hemmed myself because the alterations fee was highway robbery. "Mum, you're blocking the server." Martha appeared at my elbow, her smile tight and practiced. My daughter-in-law wore diamonds that cost more than my car. The necklace alone could have paid my mortgage for 6 months. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable in the living room." Translation: get out of sight. I moved without arguing, because that's what I'd always done. 65 years old and still apologizing for taking up space, still making myself smaller so other people could feel bigger. The living room was less crowded. Through the archway, I could see Ethan holding court, his hand on the shoulder of some silver-haired man in a suit that probably cost $3,000. My son looked like he'd been born into this world, like he hadn't spent his first 10 years in a 2-bedroom apartment where the heat didn't work half the winter. I remembered those winters, remembered boiling water on the stove to fill the bathtub so he could have a warm bath, remembered wearing 2 sweaters to bed so I could keep the thermostat low enough that we wouldn't get an electric bill I couldn't pay. My husband had passed 3 years earlier, a heart attack at 42, and the life insurance barely covered the funeral. "Rose," Sharon found me, thank God. My oldest friend, the one person in this room who remembered where I came from because she'd come from the same place. "I've been looking everywhere for you. This house is like a maze." "It's something, isn't it?" I gestured at the oil paintings on the walls, the kind that came with certificates of authenticity and insurance riders. Sharon squeezed my hand. She knew what I was thinking. She'd been there for all of it, the lean years, the hard years, the years when I'd sewn patches on Ethan's jeans because new pants weren't in the budget. "He's done well for himself." "He has." I didn't say what else I was thinking, that he'd done well and forgotten who'd made it possible. The crowd started moving toward the dining room. Someone was tapping a knife against Crystal, that universal signal for speeches and toasts. Martha herded everyone like a society hostess, which I supposed she was now. Her laugh carried over the crowd, bright and artificial, as the flowers she'd probably paid someone a fortune to arrange. We filed in, Sharon sticking close to me. The dining room table was set for 30, china and silver gleaming under another chandelier. I found myself near the back, naturally. The important people, the business associates and country club friends, clustered near the head of the table where Ethan stood. He looked good. I had to give him that. Tall, confident, expensive haircut, watch that probably cost more than my first car. He raised his glass and the room fell silent. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," he said, and his voice had that smooth quality of someone used to being listened to. "Martha and I are celebrating 10 years of marriage, and I couldn't imagine doing it without the people who matter most to us." People smiled and nodded. I felt something tighten in my chest, but I told myself to relax. This was his night. Let him have it. 10 years ago, I married the love of my life, Ethan continued, looking at Martha with an expression I wanted to believe was genuine. And in that time, we've built something incredible together. A family, a home, a life that exceeds anything I dreamed of when I was starting out. When he was starting out, in the apartment I'd rented for him near campus, eating ramen noodles I'd bought in bulk while I worked 3 jobs to cover his tuition. I've learned a lot in these 10 years, Ethan said, about what matters, about who matters, about the difference between the people who are in your life out of obligation and the people who are there because they genuinely care about your success and happiness. The tightness in my chest spread to my throat. Sharon's hand found mine under the table. Real family, Ethan said, raising his glass higher, are the ones who bring you joy, the ones who support your dreams, who celebrate your victories, who make your life better just by being in it. To family. To family, the crowd echoed, glasses rising. Ethan drank, and then his eyes found mine across the room. For a moment, just a moment, I thought he might acknowledge me, might say something, anything, about the woman who'd raised him. Instead, he set down his glass and said, "Mum, you can go now." The room went silent. Someone coughed. I felt 30 pairs of eyes turn toward me, waiting to see what I would do. Waiting to see if the old woman in the cheap dress would make a scene. I stood up slowly. My legs felt like water, but I made them work. I set my napkin on the table carefully, like I was in church, like I was someone who mattered. "Happy anniversary, Ethan," I said. My voice didn't shake. I was proud of that. I walked out of that dining room with my head up, past the oil paintings and the crystal and the marble floors. Sharon followed me, her hand on my back. Neither of us spoke until we were outside in the cold October air, standing by my 15-year-old Honda in a driveway full of luxury cars. "Rose," Sharon started, but I shook my head. "Don't," I said. "If you say something kind right now, I'll cry, and I'm not going to give them that satisfaction." I drove home on autopilot, Sharon following in her own car. My house was dark when I pulled into the driveway, a small ranch style I'd bought after years of renting. It was paid off now, one of the few things I owned outright. The mortgage company had sent me a little ceremony kit when I made the final payment, like it was something to celebrate. I'd put it in a drawer and never looked at it again. Inside, I turned on every light. I needed brightness, needed to push back the darkness that wanted to swallow me whole. Sharon made tea without asking, the way she'd done 1,000 times before in happier circumstances. "He's stressed," she offered, setting a mug in front of me. "Big business deals, you know how it is." "No," I said. "I don't know how it is. I don't know how you treat your mother like garbage because you're stressed about making your second million." Sharon was quiet. She knew I was right. I sipped the tea and burned my tongue and didn't care. "You can go now," I repeated, testing the words out. They sounded even worse the second time. Clinical, dismissive, like I was a servant being sent away after my usefulness had ended. "What are you going to do?" Sharon asked. "I don't know yet." But that was a lie. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I just wasn't ready to say it out loud yet, wasn't ready to admit that the sweet, accommodating Rose Langford, who'd spent 65 years being grateful for scraps, was about to burn down everything her son had built. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my bed, the same bed I'd shared with my husband 40 years ago, and stared at the ceiling and thought about all the things I should have said, all the ways I should have fought back, all the moments I'd swallowed my pride and told myself it was for the best. When dawn came, grey and cold through my bedroom window, I got up and made coffee and sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen. I'd always been a list maker. When the world felt chaotic, I made lists to organize it, to make it manageable. At the top of the page, I wrote, "What Ethan doesn't know." The first item came easily. The house. This house, the one I'd bought and paid off, was in my name only. When I'd purchased it, the mortgage broker had suggested adding Ethan as a co-owner for estate planning purposes. I'd refused. Something in my gut had told me to keep it separate, to maintain this one thing that was entirely mine. Second, my savings. I'd never told Ethan how much I had in the bank. He assumed I was living on Social Security and a small pension from my teaching years, and I'd never corrected that assumption. But I'd been saving for 50 years, putting away every spare dollar, And between my teacher's pension, my social security, and the nest egg I'd built, I had nearly $400,000 spread across various accounts. Third, the life insurance policy, my husband's company policy, the one that had barely covered his funeral, had been small. But I'd taken out my own policy years ago, a substantial one, and Ethan was still listed as the beneficiary. I could change that with a single phone call. Fourth, and this was the important one, the stocks. 20 years ago, when Ethan had started his first company, I'd invested $50,000. It had been every penny I had at the time, my entire savings, but he'd promised me it was a sure thing. He'd given me stock certificates, official documents that said I owned 15% of Langford Enterprises. The company had grown. I'd seen the valuations in business magazines. Langford Enterprises was worth $30 million now, maybe more. My 15% stake was worth $4.5 million. Ethan hadn't mentioned those stocks in years. I don't think he remembered they existed. He'd bought out other early investors as the company grew, but he'd never offered to buy me out. I suspect he'd simply forgotten that his mother owned a significant piece of his empire. I was still sitting there, staring at my list, when my phone rang. Thomas. Right on time. We'd been meeting for coffee every Sunday morning for 5 years, ever since his wife passed and my calendar opened up enough to have a social life. You sound tired, he said when I answered. Rough night. Want to talk about it? Over coffee, same place. I'll get us a table. The diner was busy with the after-church crowd, but Thomas had snagged our usual booth in the corner. He was already working on his second cup of coffee when I slid in across from him, a tall man with white hair and sharp eyes that didn't miss much. Tell me, he said simply. So I did. I told him about the party, about Ethan's speech, about the dismissal in front of 30 people. Thomas listened without interrupting, his face growing harder with each sentence. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, What do you want to do about it? I want to hurt him, I said, and hearing myself say it out loud felt like opening a pressure valve. I want him to feel what I felt last night. I want him to understand what he threw away. Thomas nodded slowly. You know I spent 40 years in corporate law before I retired. I know. And you know that I've seen every kind of family business dispute there is. I know that too. He pulled out his phone and opened the calendar. Come by my house tomorrow afternoon. Bring every piece of paper you have related to Ethan's business. Stock certificates, contracts, emails, anything. We're going to go through it all. Thomas. He dismissed you, Rose, in public, in front of people who matter to him. That's not just cruel, it's stupid. Because he forgot the first rule of business, never make an enemy of someone who has leverage over you. I felt something shift in my chest, something that felt almost like hope. Do I have leverage? Let's find out. I spent the rest of Sunday gathering documents. I'd kept everything in a filing cabinet in my spare bedroom, organized by year and category, because that's how my teacher's brain worked. Stock certificates, bank statements, the original investment agreement I'd signed 20 years ago, emails Ethan had sent me about the business in the early days, full of promises and gratitude that felt like reading messages from a stranger now. There was more than I'd remembered. A second investment, 5 years after the first, another $20,000 when Ethan had needed capital to expand. He'd never paid me back for that one, never even acknowledged it as a loan. I'd written loan to Ethan in my ledger, but he'd treated it like a gift. I found photographs too. Ethan at his college graduation, me standing next to him in a dress I'd sewn myself, because buying one wasn't in the budget. Ethan cutting the ribbon at his first office, me in the background holding the camera he'd shoved into my hands before the press showed up. Ethan at his wedding, Martha radiant in a $30,000 dress, me seated in the second row because the first row was reserved for immediate family. By the time I finished, I had 2 boxes full of documents and a clarity of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was focused. Monday afternoon, I drove to Thomas's house, a modest colonial in an older neighborhood. His wife had decorated it, and he'd kept everything exactly as she'd left it, down to the floral wallpaper in the kitchen. It was comforting somehow, this shrine to a love that had lasted 52 years. We spread everything out on his dining room table. Thomas put on reading glasses and went through it all methodically, making notes on his own legal pad, occasionally stopping to photograph documents with his phone. "This is good," he said after an hour. "This is very good." "What am I looking at?" "You own 15% of a company worth approximately $30 million. That makes your stake worth $4.5 million, give or take. But here's the interesting part." He tapped the original investment agreement. "This document entitles you to quarterly dividend payments based on company profits. Have you been receiving those?" I shook my head. "He owes you back dividends. Based on the financial reports I can find online, the company has been profitable for years. You're probably owed somewhere in the neighborhood of $300,000 in missed dividend payments." The number was so large I couldn't quite process it. "Can we make him pay?" "We can do more than that. This agreement also gives you certain rights as a shareholder. You're entitled to review the company's books. You can call for shareholder meetings. And most importantly, you have approval rights over any major business decisions." "What does that mean?" Thomas smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "It means that if Ethan wants to sell the company, or take on new investors, or make any significant changes to the corporate structure, he needs your signature. And from what I'm seeing in the business press, he's in the middle of negotiating a major acquisition that would double the size of Langford Enterprises." I felt my hand start to shake. "He needs my permission?" "He needs your permission, and based on how he treated you on Saturday night, I'm guessing he has no idea." We spent the next 2 hours planning. Thomas made phone calls to lawyers he knew, explaining the situation in vague terms, getting advice. I listened and took notes, and felt something cold and sharp crystallizing in my chest. "Here's what we're going to do," Thomas finally said. "We're going to send a letter to Ethan's office, formal legal correspondence, reminding him of your stake in the company and requesting the dividend payments you're owed. We're going to request access to the company's financial records, as is your right, and we're going to do it all by the book, completely legal, completely above board. And then we wait. He'll either pay you what he owes and hope you go away, or he'll try to fight it. Either way, we've got him in a position where he has to acknowledge you exist." It wasn't enough, not nearly enough, but it was a start. The letter went out on Tuesday morning, sent via certified mail to Langford Enterprises' main office. Thomas had drafted it in the cold, formal language of corporate law, the kind of letter that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. I signed it with a shaking hand, then dropped it in the mail before I could second-guess myself. Wednesday passed in silence. Thursday, too. I started to wonder if maybe Ethan would just ignore it, pretend it didn't exist the way he'd been pretending I didn't exist. Friday afternoon, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. "Mom." Ethan's voice tight with something I couldn't quite identify. Anger? Fear? "We need to talk." "Do we?" "Don't play games. I got a letter from some lawyer. What the hell is this about?" I'd been preparing for this moment all week, practicing what I'd say, how I'd sound. Calm, reasonable, unmoved by his anger. "It's about the money you owe me, the dividend payments I should have been receiving for the past 20 years. That was an investment, not a... It was a stock purchase. I own 15% of your company. The agreement you signed entitles me to quarterly dividends. I want what I'm owed." Silence on the other end. I could hear him breathing, could almost see him pacing his office, trying to figure out how to handle this. "Mom, listen, we can work this out. Come by the office Monday and we'll talk about it." "My lawyer will be in touch," I said and hung up. My hands were shaking so hard I had to set the phone down. Sharon, who'd been sitting across from my kitchen table for moral support, let out a low whistle. "You just hung up on him." I did. "How does it feel?" I thought about it. Terrifying and incredible. The weekend passed in a blur. Thomas called Saturday morning to tell me that Ethan's corporate lawyer had already reached out, asking for a meeting. I told him to set it up for the following week, no rush. Let them sweat a little. Sunday morning I went to church for the first time in months. I wasn't sure what I was looking for there. Maybe forgiveness, maybe permission to do what I was planning. The sermon was about justice and mercy, and I sat in the back pew and tried to figure out which one applied to me. Monday morning, I woke up with purpose. I had a meeting scheduled with Thomas at 3 to go over strategy. But first, I had something else to do. I drove to a salon in the expensive part of town, the kind of place I'd never gone because it seemed frivolous to spend money on my appearance. The receptionist looked surprised when I walked in, an old woman in jeans and a sweater asking for the works. "Hair, nails, facial," I told her. "Whatever you'd recommend." 4 hours later, I barely recognized myself. My grey hair had been cut and styled, still grey but deliberate now, elegant. My nails were manicured for the first time in my life. My skin looked fresher somehow, younger. I'd spent $600, more than I'd ever spent on myself in a single day. I looked in the mirror and saw someone who mattered, someone who took up space without apologizing. Sharon met me for dinner that night and did a double take. "Rose Langford, what have you done?" "I'm preparing for battle," I said. The meeting with Ethan's lawyers was scheduled for Thursday. Thomas prepped me for 3 days, going over everything they might ask, everything they might offer. He told me to expect them to try to buy me out, to offer me a lump sum for my shares that would sound impressive, but would actually be far less than what I was owed. "Don't accept the first offer," he said. "Don't accept the second one either. They need you more than you need them right now." Thursday came. Thomas picked me up at noon and drove us to the law offices of Preston and Bailey, the firm that represented Langford Enterprises. The building was all glass and steel, the kind of place that was designed to intimidate. I wore a navy suit I'd bought the day before, expensive but not flashy, professional. I looked like someone who belonged in this building, someone who knew her worth. The conference room was on the 15th floor, with windows overlooking the city. 3 lawyers sat on one side of the table. Ethan sat at the head, Martha next to him. They both stared when I walked in, and I knew they were seeing what Sharon had seen. Someone new, someone different, someone who wasn't going to be dismissed anymore. "Mrs. Langford," the lead attorney said, standing to shake my hand. "I'm Richard Preston. Thank you for coming in." "Let's get to it," I said, sitting down. Thomas settled in next to me, opening his briefcase with practiced ease. Preston cleared his throat. "We've reviewed your claim regarding dividend payments. While we dispute the interpretation of the original investment agreement, Langford Enterprises is willing to make a good-faith payment to resolve this matter. We're prepared to offer you $100,000. I laughed. Actually laughed. 100,000? I'm owed 3 times that much in back dividends alone. The agreement is ambiguous about the calculation method. The agreement is crystal clear, Thomas interrupted, and my client is entitled to not just the back payments, but continued quarterly dividends going forward. Now, are we here to negotiate in good faith, or are we here to waste everyone's time? Ethan spoke for the first time. "Mom, be reasonable. The company is going through a critical period right now. We can't afford to be paying out huge sums. You're negotiating an acquisition worth $40 million, I said flatly. I've been reading the business papers. Don't tell me you can't afford to pay me what you owe." His face went red. Martha put a hand on his arm, warning him to stay calm. The lawyers exchanged glances. "Let's table the dividend question for now," Preston said smoothly. "The larger issue is your ownership stake. Mr. Langford would like to purchase your shares. We're prepared to offer $1 million. 1 million. It sounded like all the money in the world. It sounded like security and comfort, and never having to worry again. It sounded like exactly what they wanted me to think it was: generous. My 15% is worth 4.5 million, I said, at minimum. Based on what valuation? Based on the acquisition you're negotiating, based on the company's assets and revenue, based on simple mathematics. Preston started to respond, but I held up a hand. Here's what's going to happen, I said, and I marveled at how steady my voice was. You're going to pay me the 300,000 you owe in back dividends. You're going to set up automatic quarterly payments going forward. And you're going to give me full access to the company's financial records, as is my right as a shareholder. Then, and only then, will I consider selling my shares. Mom, Ethan started. And you're going to stop calling me that, I said, looking directly at him. Because real family are the ones who bring you joy, remember? I'm just a shareholder now. Just another name on your corporate documents. So you can call me Mrs. Langford, and we can keep this professional. The room was completely silent. Martha's face had gone pale. Ethan looked as though I had slapped him. Preston recovered first. We'll need to consult with our client and get back to you. You do that, Thomas said, standing up. We'll expect to hear from you within 48 hours. Otherwise, we'll see you in court. We left them sitting there, walked out through the glass and steel lobby, and didn't speak until we were in Thomas's car. Then I started shaking, full-body tremors that I couldn't control. You were perfect, Thomas said quietly. Absolutely perfect. I thought I was going to throw up. I know, but you didn't. You faced him down and you won. I didn't feel like I'd won. I felt hollowed out, exhausted, like I'd run a marathon. But there was something else there too, something fierce and bright. I'd stood up to them. I'd said no, and the ceiling hadn't fallen in. Preston called Saturday morning with a revised offer. 200,000 in back dividends, quarterly payments going forward, and 2 million for my shares. Not good enough, Thomas told him, and hung up. Monday, the offer went up again. 250,000 and 2.5 million for the shares. Getting closer, Thomas said. Why are they negotiating? I asked. Why not just take me to court? Because they're on a deadline. That acquisition I mentioned, it's supposed to close in 6 weeks. They need all major shareholders to sign off, and you're a major shareholder. Every day they spend fighting with you is a day closer to their deal falling apart. Wednesday, Preston called again. 300,000 quarterly dividends, calculated on the more generous formula Thomas had proposed, and 3 million for my shares. We'll take the dividend payments, Thomas said, but Mrs. Langford isn't selling. Not yet. Mr. Bailey, be reasonable. My client is being perfectly reasonable. She's entitled to hold on to her investment. Now, we'll expect the dividend payment within 7 business days, and the quarterly payments to begin immediately. As for the shares, she'll consider offers once she's had a chance to review the company's financials. He hung up before Preston could argue. You're not going to sell? I asked. Not until after the acquisition, Thomas said. Once that goes through, your shares will be worth even more. But more importantly, right now you have leverage. Ethan needs your signature on that deal. The longer you wait, the more desperate he gets. This feels cruel. He told you to leave his party, in front of everyone who matters to him. This isn't cruel, Rose. This is consequences. The dividend check arrived by courier the following Monday. $300,000. I stared at it for a long time before depositing it in my bank account. It was more money than I'd ever seen in one place, more than I'd earned in years of teaching, more than my house had cost when I bought it. It was also exactly what I was owed. That same week, I gained access to Langford Enterprises' financial system. Thomas and I spent 2 full days reviewing the records, and what we uncovered filled me with intense fury. Ethan had been paying himself a salary of $800,000 a year. Martha was on the payroll too, as a consultant, making $200,000 despite having no obvious role in the company. They'd bought a vacation home in Aspen and written it off as a business expense. They'd purchased luxury cars, also somehow business expenses. They'd taken trips to Europe and Asia, all billed to the company. Meanwhile, I'd been living on my pension and Social Security, declining invitations to visit them because I couldn't afford the plane ticket. "This is fraud," Thomas said, making notes. "Not all of it, but some of these personal expenses claimed as business costs. That's tax fraud." "What do we do with it?" "For now, nothing. We keep this information as insurance. If Ethan tries to fight dirty, we have ammunition." The acquisition deal was supposed to close in 3 weeks. I knew this because Preston had sent increasingly desperate letters explaining how important it was, how many jobs depended on it, how I was jeopardizing the future of the company. I didn't respond. I let them sweat. 2 weeks before the closing date, Ethan showed up at my house. It was 9 p.m, and I was in my pajamas watching television when someone started pounding on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw my son, wild-eyed and furious. "Open the door, Mum." I almost didn't. Almost called the police and reported him for harassment, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened the door with the chain still on. "What do you want, Ethan?" "I want to know what the hell you think you're doing." "Protecting my investment. Now go home. This deal is going to fall apart if you don't sign off. Do you understand that? Everything I've built, everything I've worked for, it's going to collapse because you're being vindictive." "Vindictive," I repeated. "That's an interesting word. Is it vindictive to expect the money I'm owed? Is it vindictive to exercise my rights as a shareholder? You're my mother. And you're my son. You told me to leave your anniversary party. You dismissed me like I was nothing. So now I'm treating you exactly the way you treated me, like we're strangers, like all that matters is business." I was frustrated that night. I didn't mean, "Yes, you did. You meant every word. And you know what the really sad part is? I would have forgiven it. If you'd called the next day and apologized, if you'd shown even a shred of remorse, I would have let it go. But you didn't. You forgot about it. You forgot about me. Until you needed something." "Mum, please." His voice cracked on the word. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I said, for how I treated you. Just sign off on this deal." I looked at him through the gap in the door. He looked tired, older than his 40 years. Part of me wanted to give in, wanted to be the good mother who sacrificed everything for her child's success. That's who I'd always been, but I wasn't that person anymore. "I'll think about it," I said, and closed the door in his face. The acquisition deal had a hard deadline. If all the paperwork wasn't signed and filed by October 15th, the whole thing would fall through and Ethan would lose the biggest opportunity of his career. It was now October 10th. Preston called every day, sometimes twice a day. The offers kept climbing. $4 million for my shares, $4.5 million, $5 million. "They're panicking," Thomas said with satisfaction. "This is beautiful." I didn't feel beautiful. I felt sick to my stomach every time I thought about what I was doing. But I also remembered standing in that dining room, hearing my son tell me to leave, watching 30 people witness my humiliation. October 12th, Martha called. I was surprised enough that I answered. "Rose, please, we need to talk." "I don't think we have anything to talk about, Martha." "You're destroying Ethan. You're destroying our family." "I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply exercising my legal rights." "He made a mistake. He said something stupid at a party. Are you really going to ruin his life over one bad night?" "It wasn't one bad night," I said quietly. "It was years of being pushed aside. Years of being treated like an embarrassment. Years of watching him spend money on cars and vacations while I lived on 70 cents a day for food, because that's all I could afford after I paid for his education. He didn't know. He didn't care to know. Neither did you. I was convenient when you needed a babysitter or someone to hem your dresses. I was inconvenient when you wanted to project success and sophistication. You can't have it both ways. What do you want? Name your price. I want respect. I want acknowledgement. I want him to understand what he threw away. We can give you money. I don't want your money. I want an apology, a real one, public, the way the insult was public. Silence on the other end. Then, he'll never do that. Then I guess the deal falls through. I hung up feeling shaky but resolute. Thomas would have been proud. October 13th, nothing happened. No calls, no visits, no offers. The silence was somehow worse than the harassment. October 14th, at 2 p.m, I got an email. From Ethan. Subject line: Please read this. The message was short. Mum, I'm hosting a dinner tomorrow night at the house. Small gathering, just family and a few close friends. I need you to come. Please, I'll explain everything then. The dinner starts at 6. Please come. E. I showed it to Thomas when he came by that evening. It's a trap, he said immediately. Maybe, or maybe he's finally ready to do what I asked for. You think he's going to apologize? Publicly? I think he's desperate enough that he might. Don't go alone. I won't. You're coming with me. Thomas tried to argue, but I insisted. If this was my last confrontation with my son, I wanted a witness. I wanted someone on my side. October 15th dawned cold and clear. The acquisition deal was supposed to close at 5 o'clock. If it didn't, everything fell apart. Ethan's dinner started at 6. The timing wasn't a coincidence. I dressed carefully, the same navy suit I'd worn to the lawyer's office, but with a silk blouse underneath that Sharon had helped me pick out. Professional but feminine, strong but not harsh. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw someone who could walk into that house and hold her ground. Thomas picked me up at 5:30. Last chance to back out. I'm not backing out. Let's go. The drive to Ethan's house felt shorter than it should have. Too soon, we were pulling into the circular driveway, parking between a Mercedes and a BMW. The house was lit up like Christmas, every window glowing. Martha met us at the door. She looked composed, perfect as always, but I could see the strain around her eyes. Rose, thank you for coming. And you brought a guest. Thomas Bailey. We've met. Of course. She smiled tightly. Please, come in. Ethan is in the living room. We followed her through the marble foyer, past the oil paintings and crystal. There were maybe 15 people in the living room, and I recognized most of them. Business associates of Ethan's, a few neighbors, Sharon, who must have been invited separately. She caught my eye and gave me a small nod of support. Ethan stood near the fireplace, glass in hand. He'd aged in the past month, new lines around his eyes, a tightness to his jaw. When he saw me, something flickered across his face. Relief? Fear? I couldn't tell. Mom, he said, setting down his glass and walking toward me. Thank you for coming. The room had gone quiet. Everyone was watching us, waiting to see what would happen next. You asked me to be here, I said evenly. So here I am. He nodded, swallowed hard. I wanted everyone to hear this, everyone who matters to our family. Martha moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his. A united front. 4 weeks ago, Ethan said, and his voice carried through the room. I said something at our anniversary party, something cruel and thoughtless. I told my mother she could leave, dismissed her like she didn't matter, and I've spent the past month dealing with the consequences of that. Some of the guests shifted uncomfortably. They'd been there that night. They'd witnessed it. I justified it to myself, Ethan continued. Told myself I was just frustrated, that it came out wrong, that she'd understand eventually. But the truth is, I meant it in that moment. I wanted her gone because having her there reminded me of things I'd rather forget. Where I came from, what I owed, who I used to be before I became successful. He paused, and I could see him struggling with what came next. My mother put herself through hell to raise me. She worked multiple jobs to pay for my education. She went without so I could have. She sacrificed everything, and I repaid her by treating her like an embarrassment, like someone to be hidden away when important people were watching. Martha's hand tightened on his arm. Several people were looking down at their feet. So tonight, in front of everyone here, I want to apologize. Mum, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I said. I'm sorry for how I've treated you. I'm sorry for taking your sacrifices for granted. And I'm sorry it took a business crisis to make me realize what I'd become. The room was absolutely silent. I could hear the clock ticking on the mantel, the soft hiss of the gas fireplace. I also want everyone to know, Ethan said, that my mother is one of the original investors in Langford Enterprises. She owns 15% of the company. She believed in me when no one else did, put up her life savings to help me start this business, and I never properly acknowledged that, never thanked her for her faith in me, never included her in the success she helped create. He turned to face me fully. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. And I'm asking you to sign off on the acquisition deal, not for me, but for the 150 people who work for Langford Enterprises. People who have families to support. People whose livelihoods depend on this company's success. It was a good speech, well-crafted, sincere-sounding, hitting all the right notes. It was also exactly what I'd asked for, a public apology, an acknowledgement of my sacrifices, recognition of my role in his success. I should have felt triumphant, should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt tired, so incredibly tired. That's a beautiful speech, Ethan, I said quietly. Very moving. I'm sure everyone here is impressed by your humility and self-awareness. He nodded, relief starting to show on his face. But here's what I don't understand, I continued, my voice getting harder. If you're so sorry, so remorseful, why did it take a month? Why did it take your lawyers calling me every day, offering me increasing amounts of money? Why did it take your deal being on the verge of collapse? The relief vanished from his face. You didn't call to apologize the day after the party, I said, or the week after. You didn't think about me at all until I became a problem, until I had something you needed. That's not true. It absolutely is true. You want to know what would have happened if I'd sold my shares immediately when your lawyers asked? If I'd taken that first offer and gotten out of your way, you would have gone back to forgetting I exist. This apology isn't about me, Ethan. It's about you needing something. Martha spoke up, her voice sharp. Rose, that's not fair. He's trying. Fair? I turned to her. You want to talk about fair? Let's talk about the consultant salary you've been collecting from Ethan's company for 5 years. $200,000 a year for doing nothing. Let's talk about the vacation home you wrote off as a business expense. Let's talk about the European trips billed to the company while I was eating ramen because I couldn't afford groceries after I paid for Ethan's MBA. Her face went white. Ethan's went red. You've had access to the financials, he said flatly. I'm a shareholder. It's my right. And what I found was 2 people living like royalty off a company built with my money. My initial investment, my faith, my sacrifice. We built this company, Martha said, her voice rising. We worked 18-hour days. We took all the risks. With my money. My voice came out louder than I intended, echoing off the high ceilings. I took the risk. I gave you the capital when no bank would touch you, and you've been paying yourselves obscene salaries while claiming you couldn't afford to pay me the dividends I was owed. The other guests had started backing toward the edges of the room, trying to become invisible. Only Sharon and Thomas held their ground, flanking me. Ethan's jaw clenched. What do you want? You want me to grovel? You want me to beg? Fine, I'm begging. Please, Mom, sign the papers. I'll pay you whatever you want. Name your price. I already told Martha what I want. I want respect. I want acknowledgement. And I wanted a real apology, not a speech you rehearsed to manipulate me into doing what you need. That's what this was. I apologized in front of everyone. You apologized because you had to, because it was your last card to play. There's a difference between being sorry and being sorry you got caught. Thomas stepped forward, his briefcase in hand. Mrs. Langford, we should discuss the papers in private. But I shook my head. No, I'm done with private discussions. Everything important in this family happens in public anyway, right? So let's do this in public. I pulled out my phone and opened my email. Found the document Ethan's lawyers had sent that morning, the acquisition approval form that needed my signature. This is what you need from me. My signature, acknowledging the acquisition and waiving any objections as a shareholder. Yes, Ethan said, that's all. Just sign it and this is over. But here's what I realized over the past month, I said. My signature is worth something. Not just money, though God knows you've offered plenty of that. It's worth respect. It's worth being treated like a human being. It's worth being included in the family I helped build. You want back in the family? Martha asked incredulously. After everything you've done? After everything I've done? I exercised my legal rights. I collected money I was owed. I refused to be dismissed and forgotten. If that makes me the villain in your story, then fine. I'll be the villain. I looked at the faces around the room, some sympathetic, some uncomfortable, some openly hostile. I didn't care anymore what they thought. I'm going to sign your papers, I said to Ethan, not because you apologized, not because you begged, but because I'm not going to destroy 150 people's livelihoods to punish you. That's the difference between us. I actually care about the people who depend on me. I took the pen Thomas offered and signed the document on my phone, the digital signature appearing with a flourish. Then I hit send. There, I said, your deal can close. Your company can grow. You can keep building your empire. Ethan's shoulders sagged with relief. Thank you, Mum. I'm not finished, I said coldly. I signed the approval, but I'm not selling my shares. I'm keeping my 15%, and I'm going to exercise every single right that gives me. I'm going to attend every board meeting. I'm going to review every financial statement. I'm going to be involved in every major decision. Because I've earned that right, and I'm not letting you forget it again. You can't be serious, Martha said. I'm completely serious. You wanted me out of your life? Congratulations, you've achieved the opposite. You're going to see me at every shareholder meeting, every company event, every business dinner. I'm going to be a constant reminder of where you came from and what you owe. That's insane, Ethan said. You don't know anything about running a business. Then you'll teach me. Or your board will. I have time to learn. I have nothing but time now that I'm not spending it waiting for you to remember I exist. The room was thick with tension. I could feel everyone holding their breath, waiting to see what happened next. One more thing, I said, reaching into my purse. I pulled out a small envelope and handed it to Ethan. This is the paperwork to remove you as the beneficiary of my life insurance policy. I'm leaving everything to a scholarship fund for single mothers trying to finish their education. People like I used to be. People who actually need it. Ethan stared at the envelope like it was a snake. You don't have to worry about me anymore, I said. You don't have to pretend to care, or feel obligated, or put on performances like tonight's speech. We're business associates now, nothing more. That's what you wanted, and that's what you're going to get. I turned to leave, Thomas and Sharon falling in behind me. We were almost to the door when Ethan's voice stopped me. Was it worth it? He asked. His voice was raw, stripped of the polish and confidence. Was destroying our relationship worth proving a point? I turned back to face him one last time. I didn't destroy our relationship, Ethan. You did. The night you told me to leave your party. The years before that, when you slowly pushed me out of your life. All I did was stop pretending it didn't hurt. All I did was stand up for myself. You wanted revenge, he said bitterly. No, I said. I wanted respect. But since I couldn't have that, I settled for consequences. There's a difference. Martha's voice cut through the silence, sharp and cold. "You're a bitter old woman who can't stand to see her son succeed." I looked at her for a long moment. "No, Martha. I'm a woman who gave everything to help my son succeed, and watched him become the kind of person who kicks his mother out of his party. That's not success. That's failure dressed up in expensive clothes." "Get out," Martha hissed. "Get out of our house." "Gladly," I said. "But remember, this isn't the last time you'll see me. I'll be at the next board meeting, and the one after that, and every single one until the day I die, or you buy me out for what my shares are actually worth." I walked out of that house with my head high, Thomas on one side and Sharon on the other. Behind me, I could hear Martha's voice raised in anger, Ethan's responding, the murmur of uncomfortable guests trying to figure out how to make an exit. I didn't look back. Thomas drove me home in silence. Sharon followed in her own car. When we got to my house, the three of us sat in my living room and didn't speak for a long time. Finally, Thomas said, "You know you just made an enemy for life." "I know." "He's going to make running that company very difficult for you." "I know that too." "So why keep the shares? Why not take the money and walk away?" I thought about it. Thought about the easy path, the safe path, the path where I took my millions and disappeared from Ethan's life forever. "Because he needs to remember," I said, "every time he sits in a board meeting and sees my name on the shareholder list. Every time he makes a decision and has to consider how I'll vote. Every time he looks at the company he built and remembers that he couldn't have built it without me. He needs those reminders, because without them, he'll become exactly the kind of person who tells his mother to leave a party and thinks that's acceptable." "You're a harder woman than I gave you credit for," Thomas said, but he was smiling slightly. "I'm a woman who finally learned her worth. That's all." Sharon squeezed my hand. "What happens now?" "Now?" I thought about the quarterly dividend checks that would start arriving. Thought about the board meetings I'd attend. Thought about the life I could build now that I wasn't spending all my energy trying to earn love from someone who'd forgotten how to give it. "Now I live my life," I said. "On my terms. For myself. And if that makes me selfish, then I've earned the right to be selfish after 65 years of putting everyone else first." 3 months later, I attended my first board meeting at Langford Enterprises. I walked into that conference room in another new suit, my head high, my spine straight. Ethan was already there, and so was Martha, who'd somehow secured an actual position on the board in the interim. They didn't speak to me beyond the bare minimum civility required. The other board members were professional, treating me like any other shareholder, which was exactly what I wanted. The meeting was technical, full of financial projections and market analysis. I'd spent the past 3 months studying business, reading books Thomas recommended, taking online courses. I wasn't an expert, but I understood enough to follow the conversation, enough to ask intelligent questions. When someone proposed a new compensation package for executives that would have given Ethan an additional $200,000 in salary, I spoke up. "I'd like to see a comparison with industry standards first," I said, "and a breakdown of how this impacts our profit margins and dividend distributions." The room went quiet. Ethan's face darkened, but the CFO nodded and made a note. "That's a reasonable request, Mrs. Langford. We'll have that analysis for the next meeting." It was a small victory, but it felt significant. I'd participated. I'd been heard. I'd proven I wasn't just going to sit silently and rubber stamp whatever Ethan wanted. After the meeting, as people filed out, one of the other board members approached me, a woman named Patricia, in her 50s, who ran her own consulting firm. "That was well done," she said quietly. "We need more oversight on executive compensation. It's gotten out of hand." "Thank you," I said, surprised by the support. "If you ever want to grab coffee and talk strategy, let me know. It's not easy being one of the few women in these rooms, and it's certainly not easy when you're fighting with family." I took a card, feeling something unexpected, Not quite friendship, but the possibility of it. An ally. Over the next few months, a pattern emerged. I attended every board meeting, asked questions, requested documentation, pushed back on proposals that seemed self-serving. Ethan grew increasingly frustrated, but he couldn't dismiss me or silence me. The other board members, perhaps recognizing the value of having someone who actually challenged the status quo, began to take me seriously. The quarterly dividends came like clockwork, 50,000, 60,000, amounts that transformed my financial situation. I paid off Sharon's mortgage as a surprise gift. I donated to the local women's shelter. I set up that scholarship fund I'd mentioned, the one for single mothers, and fully funded it with $200,000. I also bought myself things. A new car, reliable and comfortable. A trip to Italy, something I'd dreamed about for 40 years but never thought I'd afford. Nice clothes that fit well and made me feel confident. I wasn't being extravagant, but I wasn't denying myself anymore either. 6 months after that confrontation at Ethan's house, Thomas and I were having our Sunday coffee when he brought up something I'd been avoiding thinking about. "You know the company's value has increased since the acquisition closed," he said. "Your 15% is probably worth $6 million now, maybe more." "I know. Ethan's lawyers have reached out twice, asking if you'd reconsider selling." "What did you tell them?" "That you're not interested. But Rose, at some point you need to think about your estate planning. You're 66 years old. Who inherits those shares when you're gone?" It was a fair question. I'd removed Ethan from my life insurance, but I hadn't updated my will regarding the company shares. If I died tomorrow, they'd go to him by default, and all of this would have been for nothing. "I need to think about it," I said. That week, I made an appointment with an estate attorney Thomas recommended. We spent 3 hours going through my assets, my wishes, my legacy. In the end, I did something I thought I'd never do. I created a trust that would hold my shares once I was no longer here. The trust's sole purpose was to fund that scholarship program indefinitely. Single mothers getting their education, women who'd been left behind, forgotten, dismissed. Women like I had been. The shares couldn't be sold without the trust's approval, and the trust's terms required that any sale proceeds be used solely for the scholarship fund. Ethan could never own my 15% outright. The best he could do was buy them back at fair market value, with all that money going to help women he'd never meet. It felt right. It felt like justice. A year after that anniversary party, I was a different person. Physically, I looked younger, healthier. The stress of trying to earn Ethan's approval had been aging me without my realizing it. Now, with that burden lifted, I had energy. I had purpose. I had a life that was mine. Sharon and I took that trip to Italy together. We spent 2 weeks wandering through Rome and Florence and Venice, eating incredible food, seeing art that made me cry, laughing like we were young again. On a warm evening in Tuscany, sitting at a small restaurant overlooking rolling hills, Sharon raised her glass of wine. "To Rose," she said, "who finally learned to put herself first." "To friends who stick around even when you're being difficult," I countered. "You weren't being difficult, you were being human." We clinked glasses, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not happiness exactly, because there was still sadness in knowing I'd lost my son, or maybe in finally accepting that I'd lost him years ago and had just been too stubborn to admit it. But peace with my choices, peace with who I'd become. When we got back, there was a letter waiting for me. From Ethan. I almost threw it away without opening it, but curiosity won out. The letter was handwritten, not typed. That alone was unusual. Ethan's handwriting, which I'd helped him practice when he was 6 years old, learning to form his letters. "Mum," it started, and I almost stopped reading there, but I forced myself to continue. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I know I have no right to expect you to read this, but I need to say some things. Even if you throw this letter away without finishing it, you were right. About all of it. The apology at the dinner was calculated, timed to manipulate you into signing the acquisition papers. I'd practiced it with Martha, workshopped the phrasing, made sure to hit all the emotional notes. It was a performance. But here's what I didn't expect. After you left, after the deal closed, after everything settled down, I couldn't stop thinking about what you said. About how I'd destroyed our relationship years before, gradually pushing you out of my life as I climbed higher. I've been seeing a therapist. Martha thinks it's stupid, which should probably tell me something about Martha, but that's a different issue. The therapist asked me to write down my earliest memories of you. I remembered you sewing patches on my jeans because we couldn't afford new ones. I remembered you making my Halloween costume by hand because bought ones were too expensive. I remembered coming home from school and finding you asleep at the kitchen table, still in your work clothes, because you'd worked a double shift and had to get up to make me breakfast before I left for school. I remembered all these things I'd buried, all these sacrifices I'd convinced myself didn't matter because I'd earned my success through hard work, as if you hadn't worked harder than I ever did. I'm not writing this to ask for forgiveness. I'm not writing to ask you to sell your shares or step back from the board meetings. I'm writing because my therapist says I need to acknowledge the truth, even if it changes nothing. The truth is, I became ashamed of where I came from. When I started making money, when I started moving in circles with people who'd gone to prep schools and had trust funds, I wanted to erase my history. I wanted to pretend I'd always been one of them. And you were living proof that I wasn't. Every time I saw you, I was reminded that I'd started with nothing, that everything I had came from your sacrifice. So I pushed you away. Not consciously at first, but gradually, systematically. Smaller invitations, less frequent calls, more excuses for why you couldn't visit. And that night at the anniversary party, I said out loud what I'd been feeling for years, that I didn't want you in my life. I can't take that back. I can't undo the damage. All I can do is tell you that I understand now. I understand what I threw away. I understand what I became. Martha and I are getting divorced. She's furious about the board meetings, about you questioning our decisions, about the fact that I won't fight to remove you. She thinks I'm being weak. Maybe I am. Or maybe I'm finally being strong enough to accept consequences. I don't expect this letter to change anything. I just needed you to know that your revenge worked. Not because of the money or the board meetings or any of that. It worked because you held up a mirror and forced me to see what I'd become. And I hate what I see. I hope you're happy. I genuinely mean that. I hope you're living the life you always deserved to live. Your son, Ethan. I read the letter 3 times, sitting at my kitchen table as the afternoon light faded. Then I folded it carefully and put it in a drawer. I didn't respond. Maybe that made me cruel, but I'd spent enough of my life managing other people's emotions. If Ethan was in therapy, if he was finally confronting what he'd done, that was good. That was growth. But it wasn't my job to absolve him or make him feel better about his choices. 2 years after that anniversary party, Langford Enterprises went public. The IPO was successful, and overnight, my 15% became worth $12 million. I could have sold then, could have walked away with more money than I'd ever dreamed of. I didn't. I kept my shares, kept attending board meetings, kept being the voice that asked uncomfortable questions and pushed back on excess. And every quarter, those dividend checks kept coming, funding scholarships for women who needed a chance. The scholarship recipients would sometimes write to me. Single mothers who'd used the money to finish nursing degrees, business degrees, teaching certificates. Women who'd been where I was, struggling and alone and convinced they'd never get ahead. Their letters made me cry every time. One woman wrote, "I don't know who you are, but you changed my life. I'd given up on ever finishing my degree. This scholarship gave me hope when I'd run out of it. Thank you." That letter is framed on my wall now, Because that's what this was all about, wasn't it? Not revenge, not even justice. It was about taking the pain and the dismissal and the years of being invisible and transforming it into something that mattered, into something that helped. 3 years after that anniversary party, I was sitting in my garden, reading, when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Mrs. Langford, this is Patricia Bennett, from the board. Patricia, hello, how are you? I'm well, thank you. Listen, I'm calling because the board is considering several candidates for an advisory position, someone to provide strategic guidance on our expansion plans. Your name came up. I was too surprised to respond immediately. It would be a paid position, Patricia continued. 60,000 a year, not much compared to what you're already making from dividends, but it would give you more formal involvement in company decisions. I've been impressed by your contributions in board meetings, and I think the company would benefit from your perspective. Does Ethan know about this? He was in the room when your name was suggested. He didn't object. I thought about it, thought about being even more deeply involved in the company I'd helped create. Thought about Ethan having to work with me, not just see me at quarterly meetings. I'd like to think about it, I said. Of course, take your time. I didn't take the position, not because I couldn't do it, but because I realized I didn't need it. I didn't need more involvement or more money or more proof that I mattered. I'd already proven that. I'd already taken back my power. Instead, I did something else. I started teaching again, not in a school, but at the community center, helping adults prepare for their GED exams. Women, mostly. Women who'd dropped out of school, who'd been told they weren't smart enough, who'd given up on education because life got in the way. I was good at it. I remembered how to break down complex concepts, how to encourage without condescending, how to see potential in people who couldn't see it in themselves. One of my students, a 30-year-old named Angela, reminded me of myself. Single mother, working 2 jobs, trying to get her diploma so she could apply for better positions. She was exhausted all the time, always on the edge of giving up. I don't know if I can do this, she told me one evening, staring at a math problem she couldn't solve. Maybe I'm just not smart enough. You're smart enough, I said firmly. You're just tired, and you're scared. But neither of those things means you can't do this. How do you know? Because I was you. Maybe not in exactly the same way, but close enough. And I'm telling you, you can do hard things. You already are doing hard things. This is just one more. She passed her exam 3 months later, cried when she saw the results, hugged me so hard I could barely breathe. Thank you, she kept saying. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I thought about Ethan's letter, about how he'd finally understood what he'd thrown away, about how that understanding came too late to fix what was broken. But it wasn't too late for this, for Angela, for the scholarship recipients, for all the women I was helping in small ways, teaching them that they mattered, that their dreams were worth pursuing, that giving up wasn't the only option. 5 years after that anniversary party, I turned 70. Sharon threw me a surprise party, small and intimate, just 20 people in my backyard, my teaching students, Patricia from the board, Thomas, of course. Some neighbors I'd become friends with, no Ethan, no Martha. That chapter was closed, as everyone sang happy birthday, and I blew out the candles on a homemade cake that Sharon had made. I looked around at the faces of those who had chosen to be part of my life, who appreciated me, who had always shown up. This was family, not by obligation, by choice. Sharon raised her glass. To Rose, who showed us all that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. To Rose, everyone echoed. I felt tears prick my eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. Thank you, I said, for seeing me, for being here, for reminding me that I deserved to take up space. Later, after everyone had gone home and I was cleaning up paper plates and plastic cups, I found myself thinking about that night 5 years ago, standing in Ethan's dining room, hearing him tell me to leave. Feeling my heart break. If I could go back and change it, would I? The answer surprised me. No. Because that moment, as painful as it was, had been necessary. It had shattered the illusion I'd been living under, the belief that if I just gave enough, sacrificed enough, made myself small enough, I'd earn the love and respect I deserved. You can't earn those things by giving yourself away. You earn them by knowing your worth and refusing to accept less than you deserve. I walked through my house, turning off lights, looking at the life I'd built. The framed letters from scholarship recipients, the photos from Italy, the certificate from the community centre thanking me for my volunteer work, the quarterly dividend statements I kept in a folder, proof that I'd stood my ground and won. This was my revenge, not the money or the board seats or the public confrontation. This life, this peace, this knowledge that I mattered, that I'd always mattered, and that no one could ever make me disappear again. I turned off the last light and went to bed, and for the first time in 65 years, I fell asleep without worrying about anyone else. Just me, just Rose. Finally enough.